But if council determines a zero increase, then your operating budget, the budget that's before you today, if I can break it out mathematically, is a little over $8 million for the utility, $8,085,000. But mathematically, in the computation for debt service covenant, that's the 115% test that we talked about every year, a 0% increase would in fact barely meet the 115, based on static consumptions that the city has experienced. Now that's looking at that $8 million and determining that the O&M piece is about 7.3 million. The capital outlay that's proposed in your budget is some $660,000. The indirect cost to reimburse Cayce for its overhead associated with that, I believe, is in there at $1 million number. I don't remember that number exactly, which is within the framework that we previously discussed with you folks, which of course reimburses the general fund for the overhead. So the budgets before you tonight mathematically will work. The risk factor is twofold, and that is, number one, you would not necessarily generate reserves in order to have additional capital. If additional capital needs came by, you would be generating reserves from the periodic cash flows from the billings, if you will, to the utility customers. And number two is dealing with, of course, the inevitable of 2012 and 13 of when the new debt service kicks in. Hear me okay? Got this thing right here beside me. We previously talked about a 5% increase, of course, provides you a little bit more comfort going into the future of year 2 and 3, if you will, when that debt service kicks in. And we also had previously provided you information of looking at a 10% rate increase is what management has proposed to level out the impact, if you will, over the next couple of years, because Cayce will be looking at a substantial rate increase down the road with when the debt service requirements kicks in under the new bond. So to summarize, what will it take to meet the 115 test for the proposed budget of 2010-2011, mathematically, plus or minus some rounding, the budget that's before you tonight will do that with a 0 rate increase. Risk factor is 2. Number 1, you're deferring substantial rate increase in the future, and 2, you're in theory not generating cash flow reserves in order to handle additional capital needs, which has been some concern of council in the past. So we've looked at that. Of course, a 5% increase we would be looking at under the current budget proposed tonight, looking at, of course, a coverage that would be in excess of 115, generating some cash, and thus reaping some benefit in the next year or two of not having to increase rates as much. And of course, as management proposed, it's a level 10% this year, 10% next year, based on the pro forma of information. There again, the assumptions are very critical, just like the budget has a lot of variables as to what's really in the numbers. So we have to go with what you're looking at, and on the assumptions of the numbers in the future, based on the current flows, the current operations, which are still subject to be changed this time next year, and then this time 2 years from now. An additional 10%, of course, would then meet your covenant test at that point in time. Mayor, Hopefully that's a brief synopsis that brings everybody up to speed without me getting on a whiteboard or without Mr. Michelson running through a bunch of numbers, which he's chomping at the bit to do. Be glad to entertain any questions.
Do you seem to think maybe this next year will be any better, or will it be probably still an increase?
Based on, Councilman, based on the current consumption patterns of your customers, which is basically static, okay? With the commission and the town of Lexington as contractors to the system, with them showing their relatively small increases. The commission is very, very static in its flows, has been for a period of time. Lexington shows a little bit of an increase in its volume. But based on those factors, Councilman, this time next year, would have to have a rate increase in order to meet the 115% test. And depending on what you do for this upcoming budget year determines the magnitude of that particular. A little bit now, less later. Less now, more later.
So if you take in consideration that you take a small increment now and gradually grow to try to build some extra, because if I understand you correctly, you're saying that you don't do anything now, then it's going to be more you have to do already.
That's correct. There's no way around it.
So instead of taking a big chunk later on, if you take a small bite now.
Right, and the neighboring municipalities, West Columbia, as y'all read in the papers, has had a rate increase. Lexington has been on a program to increase rates 15% over a period of time. I believe the commission looked at their rate structure here recently. So you're not atypical by not looking at it this year as well.
Anyone, any other questions? All right, do I hear a motion?
Motion be approved on first reading.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
This is based on a recommendation of 10%. This is based on the city manager's recommendation of 10% increase. That's what you recommend, that's what you make a motion on. Is that proposal or no?
Well, that's the basic recommendation of the ordinance.
Right, that's what I just want to clarify. You do the 10%, which is what Amy's recommending.
On first reading.
Okay.
Any discussion? Boy, having that makes you appreciate the air conditioning. It sounds quiet now that speaker's party now. Okay, we have a motion to give first reading approval to an ordinance prescribing rates for the City of Cayce utility rate structure. That will be effective July 1st, 2010. I'll call the question.
Mr. Isom?
Vote.
Mr. Shumpert?
Aye.
Mr. Jenkins?
Aye.
Mr. Myers?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye. So moved.